I never imagined my life would come to this. That a single moment, a fleeting glance in a supermarket, could unravel everything I thought I knew. But there she was, standing by the fresh produce, her laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel joke. My wife. My devoted, loving wife. And next to her, a stranger. I gripped the handle of my shopping cart, my knuckles turning white. At first, I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was an old friend, a coworker. But then I saw the way she touched his arm, the way she leaned in a little too close. My heart pounded in my chest, a dull, sickening thud that drowned out the hum of the store around me. I wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions, but something deep in my gut twisted, an instinct I couldn't ignore. I abandoned my cart right there in the aisle and followed them. She didn't notice me, or maybe she was too caught up in him to care. They walked side by side, their steps in sync, their conversation easy. I stayed a few feet behind, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, my own personal sirens warning me of what I was about to discover. When they reached the checkout, she turned to him, smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. And then, just for a second, she touched his face. I saw red. I had to clench my fists to keep myself from storming up to them, demanding an explanation. But I knew better. If this was what I feared it was, I needed to be smart. I needed proof. So I walked past them, keeping my face turned away, and left the store. But I didn't go home. I waited in my car, parked near the entrance, my eyes locked on the doors. Minutes later, they emerged. My wife, still laughing. The man, his hand on the small of her back. I gritted my teeth. They walked to a silver sedan, and she got in. Not in the passenger seat. She was driving. That meant it wasn't just a casual meetup. It wasn't just some harmless flirtation. She had brought him here, in our car. I started my engine and pulled out behind them, keeping my distance as they navigated through town. The roads blurred together as my mind raced. Was this the first time? How long had this been going on? Was it serious? I followed them for 15 minutes until they pulled into a small parking lot outside a dimly lit cafe. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. They went inside. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. 30. I shouldn't have been surprised when I saw them leave, but I still felt my stomach drop when she took his hand, squeezing it before they walked toward the car. I could feel the walls of my life closing in. This wasn't just a bad dream. This was real, and I wasn't going to let it go. I sat in my car, my pulse hammering in my ears as I watched them pull out of the parking lot. My wife was behind the wheel, her stranger in the passenger seat, looking completely at ease. The way they moved together, the way she turned to him with that same affectionate smile she used to give me, it made my stomach churn. I followed. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close, but I never lost sight of them. They didn't go back to our house. They didn't go to a hotel either. Instead, they drove to a quiet part of town where the streetlights were sparse and the roads were nearly empty. And then they stopped. A small park. Empty at this hour. I pulled over a short distance away, turning off my lights, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I watched as she turned to him, speaking softly. He laughed, shaking his head, and then she kissed him. Not a friendly peck. Not a goodbye kiss. A real kiss. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I had suspected it. I had feared it. But seeing it with my own eyes was something else entirely. I sat frozen, my body torn between rage and disbelief. Every ounce of trust one had placed in her, every night I had stayed late at work to provide for our family, every moment I thought we were happy, it had all been a lie. Minutes passed, maybe more. I didn't know. My thoughts were a whirlwind, flashing between memories of our wedding, the birth of our children, the quiet moments in between. I thought of the nights she had rolled over in bed, saying she was tired, the time she had come home late without explanation. How long had this been going on? Had I been a fool this entire time? When they finally pulled away from each other, my wife started the car again, and they drove off. I let them go. I didn't know what I would have done if I had followed them again. And I wasn't ready to find out. Instead, I drove home in silence, my mind racing, my world unraveling with every mile. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different. Empty. Even though our children were inside, sleeping soundly. The warmth that had once filled our home was gone. I stepped inside, my body moving on autopilot. My wife wasn't home yet. I checked the time. It was late. Too late for her to have an excuse. I walked through the house in a daze, past framed photos of our family, past the signs of a life I thought was real. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited. Waited for the woman I had loved for years to walk through that door and lie to my face. Waited to see if she would have the audacity to kiss me good night with the taste of another man still on her lips. And when she finally came home, smiling softly like nothing had happened, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, watching the door. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the seconds stretching into an eternity. Then, finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The door opened, and my wife stepped inside. She didn't notice me at first. She slipped off her shoes, set her purse on the counter, and sighed softly, as if she had just come home from a long, exhausting day, like she hadn't been with another man just minutes ago. Then she turned and saw me. She jumped slightly, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, you scared me," she said with a breathless laugh. "What are you doing up?" I studied her. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look nervous. She looked normal. Like this was just another night. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice even. She walked past me to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water. "You should get some rest. It's late." I clenched my fists under the table. She wasn't going to say anything. She wasn't going to offer an excuse for being out this late, wasn't going to acknowledge where she had been. She had no idea I had followed her, and I wasn't going to let her know. Not yet. So I nodded. "Yeah, you're right." She smiled, oblivious, and leaned over to kiss my cheek. I fought the urge to flinch, to push her away. Instead, I let her do it, let her go through the motions of being a faithful wife. Then, without another word, she turned and walked upstairs. I stayed at the table for a long time after she was gone, my thoughts circling like vultures. She was good at this. Too good. This wasn't the first time. The next day, I made up my mind. I needed more proof. That night had confirmed what I already suspected, but I couldn't go in blind. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it. She'd twist it. She'd cry, tell me I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things. No, I needed to be sure. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started following my wife. I tracked her movements, took mental notes of her excuses. When she said she was going to meet a friend, I checked to see if she actually did. When she said she was working late, I waited to see when she'd really come home. And every time, I found another piece of the puzzle. She was meeting different men, not just the one from the supermarket. A week later, I watched from my car as she got into another man's vehicle outside a restaurant, her hand resting comfortably on his knee as they drove away together. A few days after that, I followed her to a gym she had never mentioned before. She wasn't there to work out. She met a man in the parking lot, leaned into his window, whispered something that made him grin. I felt sick. Every time I saw her with someone new, my stomach twisted into knots. But I forced myself to stay calm, to be patient. I needed to know everything before I made my move. And then, one night, everything changed. I had followed her across town, watching as she pulled into a dark, quiet lot behind a row of old buildings. She parked, and a few minutes later, another car pulled up beside her. A man got in. I waited, and waited. An hour passed. Then two. Neither of them got out. The reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. She wasn't just meeting these men. She was sleeping with them. Right there, in the car, like she had no home to return to, like she had no husband waiting for her. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to sit back and watch anymore. It was time to take this further. It was time to bring someone else in. I needed undeniable proof, and I knew exactly who to call. I drove home in silence that night, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. My mind was numb, my body cold. I had spent weeks collecting pieces of a puzzle I wished didn't exist. But now there was no denying it. My wife, my partner of years, the mother of my children, was living a double life, and I needed to expose her for exactly who she was. The next morning, I made the call. Hey, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need a favor. The man on the other end of the line hesitated. What kind of favor? Surveillance, I said bluntly. I need someone followed. My friend, Mark, had been in private security for years. He wasn't just a guy with a camera. He knew how to dig, how to get answers people didn't want to give. There was a long pause. Ryan, who are we talking about? I exhaled slowly. My wife. Another pause. Then quietly, you sure about this? I closed my eyes. I could still see her in that car, locked away with some stranger, like our home wasn't enough. Like I wasn't enough. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Mark didn't ask any more questions. I'll start today. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Mark called me. Ryan, you need to come over. I knew that tone. It wasn't casual. It wasn't uncertain. It was the voice of a man who had found something. I drove to his apartment, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I got there, he didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a folder. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Different men, different places. My wife sitting too close, holding hands, kissing, disappearing into hotel rooms. And then I froze. My stomach twisted. My throat burned. One of the photos showed her walking into a building. No restaurant, no gym, no hotel. A private escort agency. Mark exhaled, rubbing his jaw. I double-checked. That place isn't a business front. It's what you think it is. I couldn't speak. She's on their list, he continued. A client list. Client. That word echoed in my head over and over again until I thought I might be sick. She wasn't just cheating. She was selling herself. I gripped the folder so tightly it crumpled in my hands. How long? Hard to say. But from the patterns, I'd guess at least a year. A year? 12 months. Countless lies. I stood up, my entire body trembling. I need more. Mark hesitated. Ryan, give me everything, I interrupted. My voice was ice. I want to know every name, every place, every transaction. I want her entire world mapped out. Mark nodded slowly. I'll get it. I turned to leave, my mind already working, already calculating my next move. Mark called after me. Ryan. I stopped. What are you going to do? I didn't turn around. I'm going to make her pay. I drove home in a daze, my grip tight on the wheel, my heart a dull, steady drum in my chest. The images Mark had given me burned into my mind. My wife with those men, the places she went, the truth I had tried so hard to avoid. An escort, the woman I had loved, the mother of my children. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. I had spent weeks uncovering her betrayal, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a long time, staring at the house. It looked the same as always. The porch light flickered slightly, the garden beds were neat, and the curtains in the living room were slightly parted. A normal house, a normal family. But it was all a lie. I stepped inside. The house smelled like home-cooked food. The sounds of cartoons played from the living room, where my 2 children sat on the floor, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter. And then I saw her. She stood in the kitchen, humming to herself, stirring something on the stove like she was any other devoted wife, any other loving mother. I felt a surge of cold anger in my chest. She turned and smiled at me, her eyes warm, her expression soft. You're home early, she said. I forced a nod, my stomach twisting. If she saw anything in my face, she didn't show it. Instead, she walked over and kissed my cheek, her hands sliding around my waist like she belonged there. Like she hadn't spent the night in a stranger's car. Like she hadn't been selling herself to other men. I had never hated anyone in my life. Until now. I clenched my teeth and let her touch me. I let her smile. I let her pretend. Because I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed more. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to her, my mind a storm of fury and disgust. Every time she shifted beside me, I thought of those men, the way she touched them, the way she let them touch her. I had been patient. I had been careful. But now it was time to take this to the next level. I needed to make her suffer, and I knew exactly how to do it. Tomorrow, I would begin the first step of my plan. I was going to take everything from her. The next morning, I made the second most important call of my life. The first had been to Mark. That call had given me the truth. This one would give me the power to destroy her. "Mark," I said, my voice low. "I need you to do something for me." "What is it?" I hesitated for only a second. "I want you to sleep with her." Silence. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "I'll pay you. I want you to book her. Make her think you're just another client." Mark swore under his breath. "Ryan, I get that you're angry, but this isn't about anger," I interrupted. "This is about proof." Mark sighed heavily. "You already have proof." "Not enough," I said. "If I take this to court, if I want full custody of my kids, I need more than just pictures of her with different men. I need undeniable, inescapable proof." Mark was silent for a long moment. Then finally he exhaled sharply. "You're serious about this?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't." "Fine," he said at last. "But I hope you know what you're doing." I did, and I was just getting started. Over the next few days, I watched my wife more closely than ever. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed my cheek, I forced myself to stay calm, because soon I wouldn't need to pretend anymore. Mark arranged everything. He used a fake name, a burner phone, a prepaid card. He reached out through the escort service, setting up the meeting like any other client would. And just like that, she agreed. No hesitation. No second thoughts. She was willing to betray me for money. I sat in my car that night, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might break. Mark had just texted me, confirming the meeting was set. Tomorrow night, at a hotel. I stared at the message, my vision blurring. This was it. This was the final nail in her coffin. And once I had what I needed, I would make sure she lost everything. Her marriage, her children, her life as she knew it. She had played me for a fool for too long. Now it was my turn to play her. The day of the meeting felt like an eternity. Every time I looked at her, my blood boiled. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that by this time tomorrow, her entire world would be in ruins. That evening, she kissed me goodbye, saying she was going out with some friends. Liar. I let her walk out the door without a word. Then I called Mark. "It's happening," he said. "I'm on my way." I drove separately, my hands gripping the wheel with cold determination. I wasn't going to interfere. I wasn't going to stop it. I was going to let it happen because this was how I would destroy her. By the time I arrived at the hotel, Mark had already checked in under his fake name. I parked a few buildings away and waited, watching the entrance. And then she arrived. She stepped out of her car, fixing her hair in the reflection of the window, adjusting her dress like she was preparing for a date. Disgust curled in my stomach. She walked inside, completely unaware that her every move was being documented. Mark had set up a hidden camera in the room. He didn't want details, and neither did I. I just needed evidence. Evidence I could take to court. Evidence that would ensure she never saw my children again. An hour passed. Then two. When she finally left the hotel, she was smiling. Relaxed. Like she had just spent the night doing something completely ordinary. I watched as she got into her car and drove away, oblivious to the fact that she had just sealed her fate. Mark called me a few minutes later. "It's done," he said. "Did you get it?" "Everything," he confirmed. "Video, audio, proof of payment. It's all there." I exhaled slowly, my hands tightening on the wheel. "Good," I said. Tomorrow, I would file for divorce. Tomorrow, I would take my children away from her. Tomorrow, I would make sure she lost everything. She had ruined my life. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Today was the beginning of the end for her. I called my lawyer first thing. "I want to file for divorce," I said, my voice calm, measured. "Under what ground?" she asked. I clenched my jaw. "Infidelity. I have undeniable proof." She didn't question it. "Come this afternoon. Bring everything you have." I spent the next few hours gathering everything. Mark's footage, the photos, the transaction records, the timestamps. I wanted my case airtight. I wanted there to be no room for doubt. I arrived at the lawyer's office at exactly 2 p.m. She was a sharp woman, mid-40s, with a reputation for being ruthless in court. Exactly what I needed. As I laid out the evidence, she went through it without flinching. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked up at me. This is more than enough. What are my chances of getting full custody? With this, she tapped the folder. Very high. That was all I needed to hear. She began drafting the papers immediately. We'll serve her within the next few days, she said. Be ready. I was more than ready. That night, I went home and acted as if nothing had changed. My wife sat across from me at dinner, chatting about her day, laughing with the kids. She had no idea the walls were about to close in on her. I looked at my children, their innocent faces, and felt a surge of determination. I wasn't just doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it for them, to protect them from the woman they didn't know, to make sure they never had to see the monster behind her mask. Soon, she would know what it felt like to lose everything, just like she had done to me. The divorce papers were served 3 days later. I was at work when it happened. My lawyer had arranged for a process server to deliver them at home, right in the middle of the afternoon when she'd be alone. At exactly 3:27 p.m., my phone buzzed. It's done. She has the papers. I sat back in my chair, staring at the message, my pulse steady. Now I waited. When I got home that evening, I stepped inside and found her sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of her. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She had been crying. Ryan, she whispered, her voice shaking. What is this? I dropped my keys on the counter and crossed my arms. You know what it is. She stood up, her hands trembling as she clutched the papers. You're divorcing me? I exhaled sharply. You're surprised. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? I let out a short, bitter laugh. Why? I repeated. You really want me to spell it out for you? Her lip quivered. I made a mistake, Ryan, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can. I slammed my hand against the table. A mistake. I hissed. You didn't make a mistake, Sarah. You made choices. Repeatedly. Over and over again. She shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. I love you. I love our family. Don't. I cut her off coldly. Don't stand there and lie to me. I know everything, Sarah. I know where you've been. I know what you've been doing. I know who you've been doing it with. Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I stepped forward, leaning in close. I know about the escort agency. She froze. A choked gasp escaped her lips. What? I stared her down, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You heard me. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the chair. No, she whimpered. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. I have proof, Sarah. Photos, videos, financial records. You sold yourself while I was at home with our kids. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Please, Ryan, please don't do this. I ignored her. I'm taking full custody of the kids. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her tear-filled eyes. No, you can't take them from me. I can, I said, and I will. Her breathing turned frantic. Ryan, please, don't take my babies from me. I'm their mother. You stopped being their mother the moment you decided they weren't enough to keep you home, I spat. She lunged toward me, gripping my shirt. We can fix this. I'll stop. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't take them away from me. I pried her fingers off me and stepped back. It's too late, Sarah. She collapsed against the table, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her break down, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No guilt. Nothing. She had destroyed me. Now it was her turn to know what that felt like. The court hearing came faster than I expected. Sarah tried to fight for custody, but she was up against overwhelming evidence. My lawyer presented everything: her infidelity, her involvement with the escort agency, the surveillance footage, the bank transactions. Every secret she had kept, every lie she had told, was laid bare for everyone to see. Sarah sobbed in court, claiming she had made mistakes but was still a good mother. I didn't flinch. I simply let the evidence speak for itself. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of our children, Sarah let out a gut-wrenching wail. She collapsed onto her lawyer's desk, trembling, as the reality of her loss set in. I walked out of the courtroom that day with my children's future secured and my dignity intact. Sarah, on the other hand, lost everything. Her marriage, her home, her children, her job, gone the moment her secret life became public knowledge. The life she had built, the one she had destroyed with her own choices, crumbled around her. And I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even for a second. Weeks passed. My children and I settled into a new rhythm. The house felt different without her, but it also felt lighter. There were no more lies, no more late-night disappearances, no more pretending. One evening, as I tucked my youngest into bed, she looked up at me with big, innocent eyes. "Daddy," she asked, "is Mommy coming home?" I hesitated, then knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "Mommy had to go away for a while." She frowned. Did she do something bad? I swallowed the lump in my throat. She made some choices that hurt our family, I admitted. But no matter what, she still loves you. My daughter thought for a moment, then hugged me tightly. "I love you, Daddy." I held her close. "I love you too, sweetheart." Always. As I sat in the quiet house that night, I finally felt at peace. Sarah had played her games. She had made her choices. And in the end, I had won. She had nothing left. And I had everything that truly mattered.